Dr. Ali, you can start.
Thank you, Ali. Class of 2024, welcome. That was a very short, kind of 30-second, perhaps like pause to wait for all of you to join. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ali Raza, and I am an associate professor of history in the Mushtaq Rumani School of Humanities and Social Sciences. And as I was preparing for today, I could not help but think that it was exactly 20 years back in this week that I, as a student, first walked through the gates of LUMS. And I hope that your 4 years over here will be as enriching and as transformative as they were for me as a student coming in. That said, obviously, things were very different when I came in as a student. And obviously the biggest difference was that I came in to a campus and you are, and you all in some ways are zooming in, at least for this semester. But that's not the only kind of moment that I want to draw your attention to. And before I begin, I just want to pause for a little bit and reflect on the moment we are currently in. It is an unprecedented moment. There is no doubt about it. And when I say that, you're probably thinking of COVID. You're probably thinking of the pandemic. And it is true. I mean, there hasn't been anything like it in a century almost. And so that's probably the first thing that you're thinking of. But the moment that I have in mind is something else. And that is something that I would like to talk to you about today. In a class, in a course that I've chosen to call History and Your World. This moment, this year, 2020, when you're joining LUMS, is also the year that has not just seen a devastating pandemic, it has also seen an unbelievable movement and upsurge across the Western Hemisphere around the question of social and racial injustice. The image that you see in front of you is an image that, if you have been following your news, comes from the city of Bristol. This is a statue of a slave trader, a man by the name of Edward Colston, a man who was singularly responsible for at least for the forcible importation and the kidnapping and enslavement of at least, it is estimated, 80,000 Africans from the continent of Africa and along the coast of West Africa, all the way to what was called the New World. And it's in 2020 that his statue is brought down and dumped unceremoniously in the Bristol Harbor. And Edward Colston, obviously, is not the only person who is getting this treatment. Again, if you've been following the news, you might have noticed that alongside the Black Lives Matter protests and alongside these other kind of movements that I'm talking about, we also have the Statues Must Fall movement. And so across the Western Hemisphere, again, I mean, these are just like very small, like snapshots of statues that are disfigured, that are discolored, that are vandalized by protesters of various descriptions. In this case, what you see in front of you are statues of Confederate generals who fought to maintain slavery in the United States, slavery that only went away, if you know your history at least, with the US Civil War in the 1860s. And I could just populate the screen by hundreds of images of statues that have been, as I said, vandalized across the United States, across Europe, and elsewhere. And so the question really is, that I want to ask you, that I want to leave you with, is that why on earth should we bother about statues? I mean, who really cares anyway? It's the past, isn't it? It's stone, it's marble, it's concrete. Who really cares? Why demolish a statue? What does it matter if a statue is there in some public space? And these are, by the way, not the only figures that you have in front of you. I want to show you another statue. You might not be able to guess who this person is. In fact, there is no way for you to guess who this person is. Perhaps though, you might be able to guess with this picture. Any guesses about who this person is? You have your chat function in front of you. You can, if you wish to, Great. Fantastic. I mean, all of you have hit the mark, have hit the bullseye on the very first attempt. Absolutely. I wish it was Aristotle, my friend. It is actually sadly not Aristotle, nor is it Napoleon. It is Columbus, Christopher Columbus. That epic explorer of the 15th century who undertakes this epic voyage across the oceans in the year 1492. And the story that you may have heard, the story that is repeated all the time, is that this is someone who wants to get to India. He's an Italian explorer. He sets off on an expedition financed by the Spanish Empire, and he's on his way to explore and to conduct trade with India, except that he lands in what was then called, or rather what they called, the New World. The New World, which was actually not that new, because in some ways that world was very old. It was a world of North America. It was a world of the Caribbean, the West Indies, as you may know it. A world that was populated by tens and thousands of years by communities in the millions, ranging all the way from North to South America and to the islands in the Caribbean, where Christopher Columbus landed. That New World. And so this is a painting of that man and his arrival in the New World. I'm just going to take a pause for a little bit, and I'm going to ask you, what is it that strikes you as you see this image? And you can write in the chat box. What is it that you notice? What is it that comes to mind as you see this image? In other words, what are you seeing? Keep going. I'm reading all that you're writing. Right. So many of you are writing about, you know, those big ideas: white supremacy, invasion, conquest, power, or forced occupation. I'm just reading it out as you write: power dynamic, cruelty. That's absolutely right. But I'm asking you again, what is it that you're actually seeing? What is it that you're literally seeing? One of you mentioned, very rightly so, about where the natives are placed. And I want you to notice where the natives are placed. They're placed in your kind of like bottom right corner, hiding where? In the foliage, in the trees. Does this placement matter at all? It does. Absolutely, it does. They're reduced to the background. Who is in the foreground? Columbus. What do you think he's doing? What do you think he's doing? Yes, I mean, what some of you are saying, conquest, invading, taking over, being arrogant, all of that is correct. I'm asking you, what is he literally doing? Very good, claiming the land as his own. That sword that strikes claim to the land, that gaze to the heavens is a gaze that is thanking God for deliverance. It's God, after all, who has delivered this land to Columbus and to the Spanish Empire. You may also see him waving a flag. That's a flag of the Spanish Empire. And if you notice and if you pay attention, you can also see a hat that lies at the bottom of the at his feet. And that hat in some ways signifies his supplication and his humility in the face of God, in front of God, and in the face of the Spanish Empire, and so on. I could go on. I could go on. And there are many ways one can read this image. And most of you have basically, you know, figured that out, that this is exactly what this image is meant to convey. But that would be part of the story. What if I told you? What if I told you? What if I told you that this image that you see before you is a painting that was first made in 1847? What if I told you that this painting that you see in front of you is a painting that is placed where? In no less an important place than the US Capitol building, that seat of the American, of the American state, of the American government, of the American empire even. That most important of all places. What if I told you that this painting is made, think about it, in 1847, almost 4 centuries after Columbus landed. What if I told you? What if I told you that this painting became so popular that it was circulated on stamps, on 15-cent stamps? In fact, it became so popular that it even graced the back of a dollar bill for a few years. This was how Columbus the myth was made popular in the United States. And this was how Columbus the myth, Columbus the afterlife, was perhaps different from Columbus the actual person. Because what that image doesn't show you, obviously, is a story that you have already figured out, which is genocide. That discovery was in fact a genocide, but that genocide obviously is not something that you see in this painting. So, but to go back to the point that I raised earlier, 1847, when do you think the first holiday commemorating Christopher Columbus comes about? I'll tell you, 1892, 4 centuries after Columbus landed in what is now Haiti, in what is now the Bahamas. Christopher Columbus, a holiday after Christopher Columbus was inaugurated by the then US President Benjamin Harrison, at that point, who said that this 400th anniversary of his landing marks Columbus as the pioneer, and I quote, of progress and enlightenment. Now think about this. So popular, what do you think the circulation of this image really does? And in some ways, I guess all of you will be able to tell what the circulation of this image does is that it not only does it whitewash history, it also tells you about who is meant to belong to this new world. Effectively, European settlers. That it is, in other words, the manifest destiny, and that was a phrase used at the time, the manifest destiny of European settlers to populate this land that is now known as North and South America and the Caribbean. That this painting, in other words, effectively stakes a claim to those who belong and reduces those who originally belonged to a status of people who shall never belong, which is why you see them hiding in the trees, in the foliage, never really meant to occupy this land, always meant, in other words, to reside in the shadows, if they are lucky enough, obviously, to survive the genocide that took place after his arrival. I'll cut it short, but the reason I mentioned this to you is because I hope what this does is that this tells you that the statues are always political. The statues and paintings and these commemorations, they're always there for a purpose, even if that purpose is not explicitly stated. I'm here to remind you, my friends, that history is never quite history, that the past is never quite the past. Never forget, and I say this to you, especially coming in from your schools as you are, you may have learned to read and learn about history as basically as a narration of this happened and then that happened and then that happened again. I'm here to move you away from that notion of history. And I'm here to tell you that I hope that what you will do in these 4 years is that you will learn to think about history also as something that is deeply political, that is a study about a past that is never quite the past, a past that is used in service of the present, a past that is used to make political claims on the present, a past, in other words, that signifies and that is meant to signify who belongs and who doesn't, and ultimately, who gets to speak for this past, for this land. And so this is not something that has merely happened. It's something, in other words, that is still ongoing. And I hope now you can better appreciate why is it that these statues in some ways matter. And this is why I leave you with a sign on the statue which says, effectively what these statues end up doing is they end up glorifying and celebrating genocide. And they keep on making claims about, again, who belongs to this land and who doesn't belong to this land. And this is why, my friends, this is why history matters. And this is why I hope that you, in your 4 years at least, I hope that I'll see at least some of you in a history course sometime soon. And this is why I hope you can learn to understand how history and your world, and I say that again, your world are tied together. Thank you very much. This was an absolute pleasure, and I'll give my way and I'll give my time now over to Dr. Faiza Ismail. She's a colleague in the law department. Faiza, over to you. Thank you all, guys. I really appreciate it. Peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. It was very insightful and useful. Well, I did not know history is so connected to politics. Well, yes, so yes, I'm Faiza Ismail from School of Law. I've been with law school for now 4 years. First of all, I welcome you to LUMS, and I assure you of life-changing experience at this prestigious institution of Pakistan. Second, I'm going to talk about BA LLB program, which the law school offers, and then I'll give you a glimpse of what classes at law school looks like or feels like. BA LLB program is a 5 years program where first 2 years law students spend time studying fundamental areas of laws such as Pakistan legal system, legal reasoning, and legal theory. So speaking of legal reasoning, and speaking of particularly Pakistan legal system, you would be talking about Panama judgment, for instance, Asia Bibi, the case, the lawsuits which are going on in the US against local bodies for imposing lockdown. So there is quite an interesting debate about lockdown and violation of fundamental freedoms of the people of America. So we get, right, so let me give you a glimpse of a law school's lecture. I'm gonna share these slides with you. Let's see what it is. Here. Yes, so debates like coronavirus pandemic has opened floodgates of lawsuits in the US. There's a conflict between public health and freedom. So local bodies imposing lockdown is taken as violation of certain freedoms such as liberty, right to work and right to liberty and right to protest. This is an interesting debate, and there is a lot which has to be revealed over time since the pandemic is going on. What I'm gonna talk about is constitutional law, but before I head towards constitutional law, I would just like to know what are the expectations, what are students' expectations about a law school's lecture. Let me find the chat option. Yes. Yes, tell me, what are your expectations? What do you think you'll be talking about? Are all the courses closely linked to? Well, we make sure that current affairs are discussed in the classroom so that students would know the theoretical perspective and practical perspective of both. Is this for SASOL freshmen only? No, it is for entire LUMS students, because at law school we offer legal reasoning, which is a very famous course. And we offer Pakistan legal system, which being Pakistani or somebody who's living in Pakistan should be very well aware of. This is a combined session on history and law. So I don't think there is much of expectations. Yes, you would love to study law. Let me give you some idea of what it is. Constitutional law, when we talk about constitutional law, we actually talk about interpretation and enforcement of constitution, the law which is embedded in constitution. So there are different sources of law, there are different types of laws. There is family law, for instance, there is commercial law, there is constitutional law, there is property law, but I'll just give you an idea of what constitutional law is, because it generates more debate, and students find it very interesting. So why the Panama judgment 2017 has been controversial, whereas the Brown versus Board of Education 1954 has been celebrated as a landmark case to promote equality. Panama judgment, we all know, where the judges applied constitutional Article 62, which says qualification for membership of Majlis Shura or Parliament. Article 62, Clause 1, Section F says Clause 1 says a person shall now be qualified to be elected or chosen as a member of parliament unless he is sagacious, righteous, non-profligate, honest, and ameen, there being no declaration to the contrary by a court of law. So quite interestingly, court did not interpret what is honest and ameen and how does it apply to what the prime minister of the time committed or conducted. So his action was taken as violation of clause F. The court said we don't know the definition of honest and ameen, but we understand whatever prime minister did, that was not an honest act. And therefore the judges passed a verdict which later became controversial. Yes, it's quite vague. Well, we'll come back to that. Brown versus Board of Education, 1954 in the US, a landmark case where Section 114 Amendment of the Constitution of the US was discussed. 14th Amendment Section 1 says all persons born or naturalized in the US are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So every citizen of the US is equal, but that was not the case. When Brown versus Board of Education was heard in the US Supreme Court, the dispute was about racial segregation in the education sector of United States. The entire public education sector, it was divided, it was segregated between white and colored people. And Mr. Brown was the one who raised this question of inequality or discrimination at state level when states promoting a policy of segregation. The US Supreme Court made a bold decision and they rendered the Texas statute to be unconstitutional against the 14th Amendment of the Constitution of the US because it promoted segregation and it was advocating that there should be two separate types of schools, one for white people and one for colored people. And that decision has always been celebrated. Now, what judges did for Panama judgment and what they did in Brown versus Board of Education, we call it judicial activism. Sometimes judicial activism is celebrated and sometimes it's criticized. So just look at it. The court in Pakistan did not define honest and ameen as mentioned in Article 61, Clause 1, Clause 7. The selected judges removed elected prime minister. The decision was highly criticized. The US, precedent of equal but separate. So initially, in the United States, there were two, the education sector was divided into two classes of educations where there were schools for white people and there were schools for colored people. And that policy was called equal but separate. And it used to be the precedent. It used to be the policy which the court used to follow. But while deciding Brown versus Board of Education, the judges struck a statute passed by elected representatives of state, but this judicial activism was applauded. Now, what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to interpretation of Constitution, there is judicial activism where judges use their discretion to make decisions like Panama judgment, where they terminate an elected prime minister. And they can also make decisions which are like Brown versus Board of Education, where they eliminate the discrimination. My question from all of you is that, should judicial activism be promoted? If it should be, then why do you think it should be? Is there any answer? Yes, I know judicial activism is necessary. You cannot expect the Constitution to define every part. There is an overload of existence. It keeps, somebody said that it keeps a check on government. There's a separation of power, and judicial activism ensures that every institution operates within their boundaries. So what you're saying is that judges keeping an eye on Prime Minister is a good decision, is it? Was Panama judgment a good decision? Was it a good judicial activism? No, it was not. Why not? But we said that judicial activism is good because Brown versus Board of Education, discrimination is eliminated. Then how do you define? Yes, somebody is talking about Iftikhar Chaudhry. Yes, no, it should not be promoted in the past. We have seen judicial activism. You've also seen judicial activism when judiciary was promoting, well, the judiciary was trying to collect funds for the construction of the dam. It should be because human ethical sense is above constitution. Right. Now, these are the debates that we leave for you, and we take all your arguments and we discuss various aspects of your reasons in law school, particularly in constitutional law class or legal reasoning class. Yes, this is the conclusion of my session where I explain you the link between the two cases. So Prime Minister of Pakistan was sacked under Article 62 Constitution of Pakistan, again, Panama judgment, and segregation based on race of students ended in public educational institutions in the US. So you see, in law, there is no right and wrong answer. Sometimes judicial activism is good, or for some people it's good, for some people it's not. There was a time when Brown versus Board of Education was passed, and it was highly criticized by the people in the US as well who would promote the racial segregation. So that is my session. I hope it was useful. It was not as boring as you expected. Again, thanks for being with me, and I hope to see you all in law school. Yes, so we'll go back to Ali. Sorry, Ali, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Faiza. Really appreciate that. All right, guys. It's your time to ask questions if you have any. You can use the Q&A session. This is the Q&A box, and you can use in some ways the chat box too if you want. And so what we will do is that we will pick like a question each. If we have time, you may pick another one. And tell you what we think. So if there is something that you have in mind, please let us know, and we will help you out. Okay, so I'm looking at the questions.
All right.
Faiza, I can take a shot.
Sure, go ahead.
At it, and then I'll hand it over to you. Okay, so some of you have asked, will history be challenging for someone who did not study the subject during their A-levels? Hey, as long as you can read, you're okay, okay? I mean, I hope that, I hope that what I can convey to you through this session is that, look, I mean, it doesn't really matter what your background really is. What history allows you to do, what history enables you to do, is that it enables you to critically engage with your present. And so it really doesn't matter, where you're coming from or what you intend to do. My point is simple, that regardless of what you do, history will always be an amazing resource, or the study of history will always be an amazing resource in helping you to navigate, your world. And that's something that I can promise you. Some of you have asked about a PhD. I think that's a long way off. But yes, I mean, you can obviously do a major in history if you want to. If you want, you can also do a minor in history. And again, if you want to do neither, I still encourage you to please consider taking a course in history. I promise you, it will open up your world like few things do. And so, yes, it is open to, Gromani School students, obviously. It is open to the entire university. So keep an eye out. And I think I'll end there and hand it over to Faiza.
Oh, thanks, Ali. There's a very interesting question from an anonymous attendee. Ms. Faiza, do you think there are gaps in the Constitution which helps judges to practice activism? Well, there are gaps. The Constitution just provides general guidelines or I would say yes, guidelines about how to run the country. So you would find that constitutional articles, so Article 18184, for instance, allows Supreme Court to take suo motu actions on any matter which relates to public interest. So now public interest is not defined in the Constitution. It is up to judges how they define it. And that's how we see judges start collecting dam funds and they start taking actions and questioning government's actions. So gaps, I wouldn't say gaps, but generally Constitution is drafted the way that there are general rules there to run the country. Somebody is asking about law being minor and major. Both there's a possibility to take law as minor as well as major. If we were able to, 2 history courses. I think we'll go back to early if there are many questions about history, right?
Man, you guys are really bombing us with questions, which is great, which is amazing. But I think most of you have questions around both when it comes to history and law about what the pathway is, what kind of courses are taught, when should you take what. I can promise you that you will get a detailed kind of write-up from the advisement unit if you haven't already gotten it. And that in some ways will go a long way in helping you make those decisions and those choices around courses and what ought you to study. We can also have obviously a separate history session if that will help you at all. And I'll speak to the history department about that. And yes, we do offer 100-level courses, intro-level courses every semester. So if you don't get obviously a seat in this semester, in the fall semester, there's always spring. So keep an eye out. And I also teach 100-level courses. Yes, and the course that I teach is called World Since 1453.
Yes.
I think there's a question for you if you about
yes, sure.
law. I think that's something.
It's about legal reasoning and is intro to legal reasoning a prereq? No, intro to Pakistan legal system and intro to legal reasoning. Both of them are just introductory courses. You do not need any prerequisite for it. And many non-law students are taking these courses, and we are offering more than 1 sections every time we offer these courses. So it's open to entire LUMS. And it also helps you fulfill your outgroup requirement. So HSS students can definitely take these courses. Ms. Faiza, if I want to do a major in law, will it be helpful to take? Definitely, history and law are so well connected. And I think Dr. Ali and Imad Ansari from law, you guys did this course about literature and law or something like that. So I think Dr. Ali would like to tell you more about this intersection of law and history.
Or how about if I expand that even more and say that, hey, you know what? History intersects with pretty much everything that you will study. It's there everywhere. You can't escape it. As I said, it is your world. It has shaped who you are. It has told you in some ways, who you ought to be, and so on. And so this is why, again, I may sound like a broken record. This is why, again, I would encourage you to take a history course, except that I do want to pick on a substantive question that came in in the chat, and that is, does history help in quantum computing? I'm joking. I'm just saying it because it just popped up. I don't know if this is meant as a joke or not, but to give you a serious answer, yes, it won't teach you anything about quantum computing, but what it will teach you is about the social, political, and cultural context that led to a field called quantum computing. It will help you have that critical, again, engagement with your field, whatever it is that you choose to do so. But the question that I want to respond to is that how can we judge someone like Columbus, given the fact that he was obviously a man of his time? We don't really know, obviously, whether he had the same moral standards that at least we claim to have. That's a great question. I have a long answer to it, and I have a short answer to it. I'll just give you the short of it for now. the short answer is that history is not really a question about judging, figures in the past. In some ways, it is a rather pointless exercise. The more interesting question, though, is what is it that the image of Columbus or the idea of Columbus, what is it that that idea is doing in the present? What kind of function is it performing in the present, in our world? Obviously, none of us would condone genocide. Obviously, none of us would actually say yes or no to yes to Columbus's genocide. And that in some ways also strikes me as perhaps not that important a question, as I said. I'm more interested in what Columbus does in our present and why Columbus should matter in our present, or not for that matter. The last thing that I will say on this is that that there were people even there, even in that time, even in Columbus's moment, who were very, very uncomfortable, or rather who vociferously opposed and resisted the actions of the Spaniards in the New World. If you want to look up one man, and I really encourage you to look him up, his last name is Las Casas. That's Lascasas. Look him up. Look at what he wrote about Columbus's invasion. So no, even then, people had some kind of a moral compass, and people knew that what was happening was completely unconscionable. And so I would not in some ways go that far as to say that, hey, Columbus is someone who belongs to a very different time period in which was perfectly okay. It wasn't okay even then. And to answer the last question before I give it over to Faiza, we offer all kinds of courses in history, ranging from Muslim/Islamic history to European history to obviously South Asian history. We have a great focus on South Asian history. And you will also find us offering courses in East Asia, China, Southeast Asia, and courses in decolonization and comparative colonialisms, which is something that I teach most of the time. I think I'll end there. And I think, Faiza, there's a question for you, which is, yes, what law course would you recommend for a student who has never studied law? I think it's a very important question.
Yeah, this answer to this question, every student who will be joining law school, they have not necessarily studied law, but for students from HSS or SSE or SDSB, I would suggest introductory courses like Pakistan legal system. So as citizen of Pakistan, you would understand what type of legal system we live in. Legal reasoning is very interesting to understand how judges and lawyers think and why judges make decisions the way they do, which are sometimes criticized, but there are rules which they usually follow. So you might not agree with the decisions of Asia Bibi, for instance. You might not agree with Panama judgment. You might like to celebrate, just like I said, Brown versus Board of Education. But then you have to understand the rules underlying. Sometimes there's politics, sometimes there is policy. In case of blasphemy cases, we have policy as well. So legal reasoning is the course where you understand why judges and lawyers, why judges make the decision the way they do and why lawyers act the way they do. There is another very interesting question about suo motu powers of Supreme Court of Pakistan. And somebody's asking that, is this a good power or bad? And I think you think it's not a good idea to give so much power to Supreme Court, which Supreme Court's using while it's not paying any attention to lots of pending cases. I agree with you, but this power was not to use so frequently as judges started to use. That's my personal opinion. You can disagree with that. So suo motu actions can be very useful for something like missing persons dilemma, where the court can ask the state where these people have gone. For habeas corpus writ, habeas corpus about where the court's asking why people are detained without giving them any reason or the cause. So suo motu is very important, but the way it's been used for the past few years, that is questionable according to my opinion. Students, all right, let me see if there's any other question I want to. Yes, you can do a major in law. Will it be helpful to take up a few, we have answered this question. 100 level course will be offered in the spring. Yes, it will be. And there's korma cooking there, and there's discussion about food. But there's such a fear of putting private establishment. Why do you think there is such a fear of putting up private establishments in the court of law to answer for certain crimes? Why is it seen? I'm not sure what this question means. Mr. M.A. What do you think there is such a fear of putting a private establishment? You mean private entities or private commercial entities not being questioned in the court of law to answer certain crimes? I think you're referring to NAB not questioning commercial entities so much, because NAB is, we all agree, quite politicized institution at the moment. When you study Pakistan legal system, you would understand how NAB has been constituted and what kind of this. So they strike deal. Initially, they try to strike a deal with whoever they are trying, and if they don't agree, then they go for the prosecution. So that in itself, the striking a deal with the accused person, that in itself is quite interesting to see what criteria they have. So that if the accused can pay NAB certain amount of money, he would be released. So you definitely can question it on the basis of fairness. Can judicial judgment be contested like the Panama judgment? Yes, but Supreme Court has the last say, the final say. Supreme Court is the appellate court of the country. It's the apex court. So final appeal would go to Supreme Court. So they're not gonna change their decisions in most of the cases. Then how come the Supreme Court was quiet on PTM members being arrested and imprisoned? Again, policy matters. Sometimes judges take matters, judges raise questions about, sometimes it's judges' personal prejudice as well. Some judges might feel very strongly about missing person, for instance. Some judges would be very concerned about dam constructions, for instance. So while suo motu can be very important and very useful for some issues, but at the same time, there is the possibility of judges going overboard. People like Washington and Jefferson. All right, this last question is for you. Government has asked all educational institutions to open. They cannot. Private sector, when the Supreme Court is the last resort, how come it's important so much? Why are the local courts not appreciated as the, well, they are appreciated initially. So local courts are divided according to their jurisdiction, like in case of civil courts, pecuniary jurisdiction. So the value of the subject matter of the dispute will define court's jurisdiction. So for instance, if subject matter, the value of the subject matter is 50,000 rupees, then it goes to district court. But if it's 100,000 or over certain limit, then it would go to high court. Then local courts are appreciated. Why do you think they're not appreciated? And it's the same, well, in case of criminal case, it is the place of incident or the crime where the crime has occurred. So if the crime has occurred in Karachi, the court in Karachi would have jurisdiction. Do you believe the judicial system needs to be refined? Yes, definitely in Pakistan, it needs to be refined, sorry. And I think we need to get back to Ali for so many questions related to history.
Yeah, except that you've run out of time, sadly. Thank you so much for all the questions you've asked. I wish I could answer all of your questions. And there are some excellent questions in there. Thank you so much. Yes. I really appreciate that. I hope you know that you can always reach out to both of us. You can look us up online. You'll find our email addresses. Please drop us an email if you have any more questions, or if you want to find out more about the history of the law program, respectively. What I will say, though, and I think I can speak on behalf of both of us, is that this has been amazing. Thank you so much. I cannot thank you enough for your engagement. I really, really appreciate the questions and the comments. You have populated the sidebar and the Q&A chat box with. And I really hope that we get to see you in person next semester. And whether you're taking the course or not, doesn't really matter. But do drop by and say hello. And I would love to see you. So that's it for me. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Also, I look forward to meet with you, even if you take the course or not. I'm always available to talk to you.
Bye.
Bye.